Later this week, Lucasfilm will be releasing The Last Jedi, the newest film in the Star Wars saga, with many more films planned for the years ahead, for better or for worse. This wouldn't have been possible without George Lucas choosing to sell his company to Disney. So today, I want to talk about why he picked Disney to sell his company to, and how it all happened. Now, the more cynical out there will say it was for the money. After all, $4 billion is a lot of money. That wasn't the case, though. He didn't shop it around to different studios or try to find the highest bidder. When he decided to sell the company he had built over the course of 41 years, he chose Disney. There was a history between Lucas and Disney that played a pivotal role in the sale, and it dates back as far as Lucas's childhood. On a lengthy family trip, his parents, Dorothy and George Sr., took the family down to Anaheim in July of 1955 for the grand opening of Disneyland. Lucas was 11 years old at the time. His path as a filmmaker was still far off, but he immediately took to the immersive lands and rides the theme park offered. As he later described it, he was in heaven. The family would continue to make regular trips to Disneyland over the years as George grew up, planting the seed that would grow over the following decades. 22 years later, Lucas would direct this little film called Star Wars, and it would launch his career that inadvertently crossed paths with Disney. In 1979, despite being two of the most sought-out directors, Lucas and fellow filmmaker Steven Spielberg had to shop around their newest collaborative project, Raiders of the Lost Ark, to different studios in order to find funding. With Spielberg's reputation of going over schedule and over budget, the script had some trouble finding financial backing. However, it would finally find that backing from Paramount's president at the time, Michael Eisner. Eisner stressed the importance of good storytelling above all in the industry and felt that he was investing in Lucas and Spielberg as much as the project itself. Years later, the relationship between Lucas and Eisner would pay off for the both of them. In 1984, Disney was in the middle of warding off a hostile takeover. Part of that attempt included installing new leadership into the company. While not the only one to make the suggestion, Lucas would reach out to Disney's majority shareholders, the Bass brothers, and personally recommend Michael Eisner for the position. Eisner would of course accept the position, and he would, along with Frank Wells stepping in as president, serve as the new face and direction of the Walt Disney Company. One of the first things Eisner would do as CEO is, as it turns out, reach out to George Lucas. With his talent more than proven by this point, and a working relationship already established thanks to the Indiana Jones films, Eisner wanted Disney to work with him on a number of attractions for the Disney parks. Lucas, a lifelong Disney fan, jumped at the opportunity. He would have the chance to help create attractions for the very theme park he delighted in visiting all those years ago at the age of 11. Disney and Lucas would announce in February of 1985 that together they'd be developing two new attractions. The first would be a 3D film starring Michael Jackson called Captain EO, and the other would be a motion simulator based on Star Wars called Star Tours. Beyond just helping to design the ride, Lucas's own company, Industrial Light and Magic, would do all the animation required for the attraction, and both would eventually open to rave reviews. A few years later, Lucas would once again make a connection that would end up playing an important role down the line. In the early 1990s, he began working on a television show based on the adventures of a young Indiana Jones. He would eventually pitch the series to the chairman of ABC at the time, Bob Iger. Iger greenlit the show, and it ran for 2 seasons. In the nearly 20 years following, Lucas would start, create, and finish an entire other trilogy of Star Wars films. For better or for worse, they stood out as vastly different movies from the trilogy that came before it. Star Tours at the Disney parks was about to reopen with new 3D effects and a new randomized system that took guests to locations from, again for better or for worse, the prequels. Lucas himself was checking in on the ride's progress every couple of weeks over the years the ride update was being designed. By that point, Bob Iger had replaced Michael Eisner and was Disney's current CEO. The morning the ride was to reopen in May of 2011, Lucas and Iger would sit down to breakfast at the Brown Derby. The Brown Derby didn't technically serve breakfast, but when you're the CEO of Disney, that doesn't really matter much. In fact, Iger specifically made this decision so that he could speak with Lucas in private. Without beating around the bush, Iger asked Lucas if he would ever consider selling Star Wars to the Walt Disney Company. Lucas had just turned 67 years old, and he was already beginning to think about a retirement plan that involved passing the reins of Star Wars on. "I'm not ready to pursue that now," he told Iger, "but when I am, I'd love to talk." It would take another year before Lucas would fully entertain the thought, but when he finally decided he was going to step down from running Lucasfilm, he got in touch with Iger and kicked off a 5-month negotiation process. As it would turn out, Pixar would serve as a major influence for the decision. You see, one of Iger's first major decisions as CEO of Disney was to acquire Pixar in 2006. And what impressed Lucas the most wasn't what Iger did with the company, but what he didn't do. For the most part, Pixar was left to continue doing what it did best without too much interruption or change. Iger was doing the same with Marvel, which Disney had also recently acquired. Iger's style seemed to involve letting the talent do what they do best. Lucas himself held creative control in high regards, for better or for worse. I mean, his disdain for the studio system is what drove him to negotiate to retain the rights for Star Wars sequels. It's what drove him to build Lucasfilm into what it became. The only reason he had a company to sell was because of his passion for creative control. In a poetic way, it was very similar to the way Walt Disney learned to never give up control of Mickey Mouse. Perhaps that's partially why Lucas took to Disney so much. So without seeking out the highest bidder, Lucas agreed to sell his company to Disney for a total of a little over $4 billion, with half of that being Disney stock. It wasn't a quick, heartless cash grab from one executive to another. It wasn't some merger made to give himself a golden parachute. It was a creator who had spent over 40 years building an empire out of his passion, passing on his creation to an organization that he had looked up to as a kid and worked with and respected as an adult. So on October 30th of 2012, he would fly to Burbank to meet with Iger and sign the deal. From that moment, the next chapter of the Star Wars saga would begin.